Thank you for joining us today's conversation on Black History Month and equitable placement. My name is Gerardo Chavez. I'm the president of the Student Senate for California Community Colleges, and the SCCC is the official voice of the 2.1 million students in the California Community Colleges. Today, we have the unique opportunity to speak with the person leading equitable placement in our California Community College system, Dr. Aisha Lowe, Vice Chancellor for Educational Services and Support at the Chancellor's Office. Before we start with the interview, Dr. Lowe, please share with us about yourself and your background.
Thank you very much, President Chavez, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on when you might be watching this. As President Chavez said, Aisha Lowe, Vice Chancellor of Educational Services and Support for the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office, native of San Francisco, California, and an individual who just absolutely loves our community colleges. So a little bit about myself for those who haven't met me or haven't heard my story. I'm a young person raised in a single parent household in San Francisco, California, and definitely experienced as a young person all of those realities of growing up in a large urban city, those realities of growing up in poverty, of struggling to have basic needs met, but also a young person who realized at a very young age how important education was and how much education should be a tool, not just for changing my own life, but the lives of others. And so that's really the passion that has made me an educator, is just wanting to know that all students, no matter what their background, should have access to a high quality education.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your background. The first question, which you partially answered, but we can go more in depth, is what inspired you? What led you, motivated you to work in the California Community College system?
That's a great question. And so building on where I started, it's really within the California community colleges that I got to see what I feel is an amazing opportunity to work on educational reform, educational change in such a way that we can have a system that is truly equitable and is an opportunity for all people, no matter their background, to change their lives. And so building on my personal story and seeing how education literally changed my life. My mother made grave sacrifices to get me into some of the best schools in San Francisco, schools she couldn't afford, but made use of financial aid to get me into some really good schools so that she could change my outcomes. And she and my grandparents were always beating that drum for me, that education was the road to success. And I've been able to see in my own life how having an opportunity to get a college degree and continue on with advanced degrees has really shifted my family from a lower class, working class family into now, I guess I'm middle class, is what they would call it. And so when I think about where are the opportunities to create those pathways for students, was really attracted to our California community colleges. I have a whole stint of my career on the K-12 side of education, and did a number of years of educational direct service work as well as educational reform work there. Have been in other higher education institutions, but when I was still in grad school and I was, as they say, ABD, all but dissertation, I started teaching adjunct at our community colleges, and I just absolutely fell in love with the community college environment. I fell in love with my community college students. I just thoroughly enjoyed the diversity of our colleges, how literally diversity of age, diversity of race and ethnicity, diversity of SES, of language, of culture. Really enjoyed being in such a diverse, rich environment, and also just really enjoyed the conversations I would have with my community college students, and the relationships and rapport I was able to build. So even when I was still in grad school, I knew then I had set my heart on, I eventually want to end up in the community college system. All right, because these are the community members that I love, that I want to connect with, that I want to serve. And so that's a lot of what has inspired me and motivated me to help to lead in our system.
Thank you so much. Very motivational and inspiring story, a true success story of what education can do for people living in California, and also highlighting the rich diversity that we have within our California community college system. So we're in February, and in February we celebrate Black History Month, although we should be celebrating each month the hardships and the struggles, honoring the hardships and the struggles of Black Californians, but also honoring the culture. So for you as a Black woman, what does Black history mean?
No, that's such a great question. Well, of course, for me as a Black woman, it's everything, right? When I think about Black history, there's so many connections for me. When I think about Black history, I think of African history. When I think about Black history, I think of American history, right? And how those histories came together, and the ways in which that has then created what we understand to be Black history or African American history in this culture. And when I think about, I really often think about, the struggle of a people, right, to find citizenship in a nation that they were carried to. And many of us know, hopefully know that history, right, and all that have taken place in the past, where for me, my ancestors have literally led and died and advocated and sat in and stood up and fought in so many ways just for people like myself, right, and other Black citizens to have just basic human rights. And so when I think about Black history, I really think about the development of our country, right, as a nation. The two really go hand in hand. And we, of course, have made great progress, from the time of slavery and Jim Crow and things of that nature. And yet there's still so much work to be done because of that history, right? There's so many sort of vestiges of that thinking, of those beliefs, of those values, of those practices that are sewn into our institutions, sewn into our ways of thinking and being, our norms, in ways as modern citizens in the year 2022, many of us are not aware of, right? If you don't know that history, if you haven't studied that history, if you haven't studied, right, American history of the development of our institutions and the role that race and racism played in the development of our institutions, we can sometimes be ignorant of those realities. But it's such an essential part of the work that we're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, to really interrogate that history and to understand that Black history is American history, that those unfortunate realities of race and racism continue to show up on a daily basis in our institutions, in our policies, in our practices, unfortunately on our campuses and in our classrooms. And that, for me, honoring Black history is about us doing that hard work of interrogating that, of dismantling that, and of really creating environments that are truly inclusive, right? And I think that's what's essential as we think about, honoring Black history, honoring the struggle, that we get beyond diversity. It's really about inclusion. It's really about how do you create an environment where all students, Black students, all students feel welcome, they are loved and seen, right? That's a word we don't like to use in education, but that's essential. That they are loved and seen, and then we create the supports that are needed to fight against the legacy that they are contending with so that they can be successful. And I think that's how we can continue to honor Black history, is to really do the work of dismantling structural racism.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as a history major myself, deeply committed to understanding the actual true American history. The Black history is American history, and honoring what truly happened in the past and how that translates into how we are living today in the current system that we have today. And talking about honoring Black History Month while acknowledging and addressing institutional barriers and systematic racism that our Black students are continuing to face today. That really ties into the work that you're doing within the implementation of equitable placement.
Yeah.
In 2018, Assembly Bill 705 was signed into law, which aimed to place students equitably into whatever course level maximized their likelihood of succeeding. Can you please explain the original intent of remedial courses?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it really does connect back to that historical legacy we were just talking about. And this is where historical context is so important, right? We have likely often heard, the adage, the saying that you cannot know where you are going if you do not know where you have been. And remedial coursework in our system, the work of AB 705 definitely shows the truth of that adage, right? That we've had this long held practice within our system around remedial courses, developmental education, but perhaps have not been tuned into the inception, right, of those practices and what that was birthed out of. So when we look not just at our system, but across the entire nation, not just in higher ed, but throughout all of education, including K-12, right? We have to sort of place it within historical context and understand that the creation of remedial coursework, developmental coursework, really did happen in response to the diversification of our educational systems. So there was a time in our system where that was not a thing, right? There was no such thing, right, as these pathways of remedial education. But when you think about sort of post-World War II, you think about the GI Bill, you think about this open access and greater opportunity for individuals that had traditionally been locked out of higher education, getting to now access our colleges in our districts. That's where you then see the proliferation of these remedial courses. It would be similar to, on the K-12 side of the house, the creation of tracking, right? In the midst of a Brown versus Board of Education, the desegregation of our schools, you then see a number of things happen, right? You see white flight happening and sort of the privatization of education and an increasing proliferation of private school options. But you also see within public schools, as they diversified, the creating of different tracks. Why? To maintain segregation in an integrated environment. And so one thing we have to wrestle with as a system when we think about the historical context of this work, remediation is higher education's version of tracking, right? To create different pathways, different access points, and different sets of course offerings based on students' background. And so that's where that really came from. That's why the work of AB 705 is historic. That's why the work of AB 705 is diversity, equity, and inclusion work in action, because AB 705 was really directed at dismantling what had been a practice that was actually birthed out of the isms, right? Out of racism and classism, and sewn into our system in such a way that as a modern day educator, you inherited this. As a modern day educator, you inherited this under the notion and the guise, right, which makes sense to educators of students may have gaps, you have to close them. But what we weren't doing a good job of is really assessing, well, is our solution to that problem the right solution? Mm-hmm. Are remedial courses actually helping students? And with that research, which you know well, President Chavez, which clearly showed, no, it was not. Now as a system, we have to dismantle those practices, recognize the history they were birthed out of, and then we have to go back to the drawing board and come up with an effective solution. When students come to us and perhaps have some academic gaps, how do we effectively close those gaps? What we have learned for sure is remedial courses is not the answer.
Mm-hmm. I love the historical context that you provided about the remedial courses, many things that I wasn't aware of and many of our students were not aware of. That remedial courses, the intention was good. It was there to provide a tool to make our system more equitable, make education more equitable for people of color. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those students who, when I entered the California Community College system in 2016, right out of high school, and I was navigating entrance, and they told me, oh, you have to take a test to figure out where you're going to be placed in math and English. And me coming from the K-12 system as a person who was ESL, I was used to it, and it didn't raise a red flag that those tests really were going to determine my success and my stay within California Community College system. So at one point, did we realize as a system that remedial courses was beginning to become a barrier for many of our students who were navigating transfer level courses and transfer?
No, that's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, there's not one answer to that question for our whole system, right? Depending on what was happening in a local context, we certainly have some colleges and some districts that were realizing this many, many years ago, right? Started to make changes pre-AB 705 because they were following what the data and evidence showed them. But I love what you said, President Chavez, around it was well-intentioned, right? That's important for us to level set with, right? That these are well-intentioned interventions. They're just cloaked in racism that isn't as obvious, right? So very well-intentioned that these students are not as prepared. We need to create courses to help them get prepared and close those gaps. What happens in the midst of all of that is frankly sometimes unconscious and subconscious. Right now we're getting into, research in educational psychology about how powerful expectations are and how they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Now we're getting into implicit bias, right? And the ways in which we can very well intentionally say, okay, these students are not as prepared. Let's create these courses to prepare them. But there's so much both implicit and explicit messaging happening within those courses, right? Within those processes. When you really think about it, it's been amazing to me as we look at the results of AB 705, even just, that first fall 2019, first full term into implementation. It's been amazing to me because it would seem magical. How do you have thousands of students who were in remedial courses and failing them, get access to a transfer level course, and now they magically pass the class, right?
That was one of my stories.
Right? But it's because, and you probably experienced this directly in your classes, there's a lot of sort of subconscious psychological messaging that is happening that is birthed out of our expectation. What is my expectation as a student if I'm in a remedial class? How does that hamper my motivation, my self-efficacy, my confidence, my sense that I can be successful? And if I'm your faculty member, how are there, right, implicit biases and probably subconscious ways that I'm interacting with my students because my expectations are low because this is a remedial class? So it's a lot of that we're contending with. So when did we know? I would say, again, different place for different colleges. But I would say we've had evidence for some years now. There's about 10 years of research pre-AB 705 starting to dig into, okay, well, what is really the impact of these courses on students? Starting to unpack what we now know to be true, that while the remedial coursework, developmental education was perhaps created with, short-sighted, well-intentioned, the evidence was clearly showing that the intention was not being fulfilled. It's the same thing we've seen with testing, right? All of the research on our testing, not just our testing, but SAT, ACT, right? All of the research is showing us that these tools that we designed for one purpose are not actually serving that purpose. But I think we really came to a point as a system, and probably that 2013, 2014, 2015 range, where there was starting to be quite a proliferation of evidence that was showing us that remedial coursework wasn't working, right? Multiple measures project having already started, right? Some colleges and institutions really started to shift on their own prior to then the passage of AB 705.
I just wanted to highlight that portion you just mentioned about we asking ourselves those questions about students who were failing remedial courses, but magically, quote unquote, magically, they were passing transfer level courses, because I'm one of those students that I had to take 3 different math classes just to fulfill my math requirement. And for some reason, I was getting all C's in those remedial courses. But when I took statistics, I got a B. And then when I had to take basic English composition as a remedial course for English, I got a C. But magically, I got an A in English 1A, English 1B. But is there something that we understand as advocates within California community college system, is that when we're expecting, when we put those expectations on students to succeed, we must match the support in order to assess them and in order for them to succeed in those classes. Which really ties into the other portion of this question about Assembly Bill 705. So we realized that we have this problem in our system that was well-intentioned at first, but we started realizing that it was doing more harm than good. And we needed some fixing. So what did AB 705 aim to fix in our California community college system?
Yeah, a number of things, right? One thing that AB 705 aimed to fix was the testing regime. right? Again, important historical context there around eugenics, right? The whole idea of using some sort of test and assessment to sort people, we have to understand that entire idea and ideology is based in racism. And so AB 705 was really confronting partly that history, that tradition, that ideology, that tests were the effective way to understand a student's capacity. Again, so much research has been done on a number of different large scale standardized tests that shows that is not the case, right? Those tests are not an accurate assessment of a student's capacity. So that's one of the things that AB 705 was aimed at and has, really sort of successfully transformed within our system, is this notion of students being made, right? Required. You didn't have a choice. You were told you have to do this. You have to take this exam, and the outcomes of this exam are going to determine where you start, how far down the sequence you start. And as we've seen through so many examples with our students across our system, could literally be the very beginning and end of them fulfilling their academic goals, right? We have far too many stories of students who were placed low into a sequence and never got out of what I've been calling developmental education or remedial purgatory, right? They're there forever. So that's one of the things that AB 705 was seeking to do, sort of upend this tradition around testing being the main mode of placing students. But it was also ultimately, and this is the part that is key, because I think there's been a bit too much focus on course type and course level. What AB 705 is really about is pushing us as a system, one, to validate our practices. This should be par for the course. It is not often in education, and that's not just for our system, that's across the board, higher education, K-12. We are too often in education not holding ourselves accountable to the actual results of our actions. We will implement programs, we will spend dollars, right? We will change curriculum. We do not, within those processes, naturally establish an evaluation of those changes and then make decisions based on the results of whether or not what we have done is effective, right? People in the ed reform space talk about this all the time. You couldn't do this in most other industries, right? You couldn't do this in medicine, right? You can't do this in most businesses where you're not checking the success of your outcomes, and yet you just continue to go on doing things that are not effective. So that's really what AB 705 was pushing us to do. Validate your practices, assess the outcomes of what you're doing, and if it's not successful, then change your practices. Then specific really to then placement, it was this focus on no longer forcing students to take classes they did not need to take or did not want to take. We saw so many students completely exacerbate all of their financial aid swirling in developmental educational remedial courses and then not being able to continue. So it really was about equity, right? It was about dismantling those institutional barriers around testing, the impact of students' financial aid, and also the ways in which we were violating, right, students' opportunities to take on a challenge if they want to. I think for myself, President Chavez, when I went off to my undergrad institution, there were areas where I had to, fulfill requirements, right? In this area, you have to take 6 units. In this area, you have to take four units, whatever the case may be. If I decided as a student I wanted to take on a challenge and take a higher level course, nobody stopped me from doing that, right? Those were my choices. So in some ways, we were bringing into our system a level of educational autonomy that exists in most of higher ed, giving that to our students because they rightfully deserve that. But the biggest thing around AB 705 is it drew a very clear line or burden of proof for our institutions, that given the preponderance of evidence that what we were currently doing or now previously doing with remedial education was not working, it basically set a bar for our colleges and said, if you can't prove that those remedial courses are effective for students, then you need to stop using those courses. And that has really been, I think, one of the most important essential aspects of the law is setting that burden of proof, setting a bar for us to attain to. And I think that's the piece that's really helping us to now push our practice and innovate our outcomes as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for explaining AB 705 to us. And from what it sounds like, AB 705 really aimed to empower the student journey and really give the opportunity for students to make their decisions on their classes, which is very important because a lot of our students don't have a lot of time to waste, and remedial courses really gatekeep our students from transferring and being successful. So we recently heard from our students all over California that there are colleges that are not implementing AB 705. And many times those students are feeling a bit, how can I say it, frustrated with the slow implementation of AB 705, that there are still remainings of remedial courses within our system. What can you tell our students? What can they do to understand their rights under AB 705?
No, that's so essential that students do understand their rights and understand that this is a law and this is now a protected right for those students, right? That you cannot be forced into a remedial education course, that students have the right to demand. I will use that language, and I want to encourage students to demand, right? To demand access to transfer level courses. And also, I think a big part of it is empowering students and empowering their voice. I can completely imagine being a student on a community college campus. And even if it's not as forceful, right? Just being advised, let's say, right, that I should start in a remedial course. And I can think of the ways in which, depending on my background, right? Am I fresh out of high school and college is new to me? Have I been out of high school for 20, 30 years and I feel so disconnected from this entire process that I'm looking to that educator, that counselor to direct me and to direct me appropriately. And then perhaps, just taking their recommendation because I'm trusting that you are giving me the right information and you are leading me in the right direction. So really appreciate the work that the Student Senate has been doing to make sure that students are aware that you have this right. And not only that you have this right, but making sure the students are aware that the vast majority of evidence has shown that remedial course is actually not what's best for you, right? It's not going to help you to fulfill your academic goals. So I think that's the missing piece that students need to know, that you have this right to take the transfer level course, but for students also to know, and you are much less likely to be successful if you start in that remedial course. That's the information students need so that even if they're just getting counseling, right, and not necessarily being forced, but being told, oh, this is best for you, that they are armed with that knowledge to say, well, no, it's my understanding, right, that these remedial courses have been proven to be mostly ineffective for the majority of students, and that it's better for me to start in a transfer level course. At which point I would hope then students would not get a bunch of pushback and those opportunities would be open for them. But if there is pushback, then it's important for students to push to the next level and say, actually, per law, right, you cannot hinder me from taking this course. This is the course I want to be enrolled in. So that student voice, that student autonomy, that student advocacy is essential, right? We're doing the work from sort of the top down in terms of policy and compliance, as well as providing, professional development and support for our districts and colleges as we do this important transformational work. But having that groundswell from the students is also going to be so essential to make sure that students know their rights, also know what's best for them so that they can push and really demand access to those transfer level courses.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. It's very important for our students to be aware what is their rights as a student who's entering community college. I definitely did not know about my right to reject AB 708 remedial courses through AB 705 when I entered 2016 because the law wasn't there. But now that our students are entering community college, please do know that it is your right to be able to make those questions, whether is that going to work for you? And that is why we also have academic support to be able to match that support for those students who are entering transfer level courses. But also, I think we can agree that empowering students to be able to take part of the implementation process through shared governance, which is very important in order to hold accountable our systems on how they're implementing AB 705.
That's
Which
essential. One quick thing on that, President Chavez, before we move on. Want students to know that right now, every community college, all of our community colleges, by mandate, are working on an AB 705, or as we are calling it, right? Because we're really trying to shift our system from being focused on complying with a law to focusing on student support and student success. So we're really calling it equitable placement and completion. All of our colleges are working on an equitable placement and completion improvement plan that is due to our office March 11th. And to your point, President Chavez, really want to encourage students, right, to check in with your academic senate presidents on your campus, check in with your chief instructional officer or your vice president of instruction, and ask them about how is student voice being included in that planning process. Colleges are making plans for the local practices they're going to change in order to ensure that AB 705 is fully implemented. All of this is about students, right? And it's all going to have an impact on students. So want students to be aware that planning is happening on your campus. Make sure that you talk to the powers that be and push and have those necessary conversations to make sure that the student voice is included in that planning process.
Thank you so much for highlighting that, which leads to our concluding question. So we know that we faced a few hiccups in AB 705 implementation, just like any other law, of course. We face challenges with diversity within our system, local autonomy, and many other things. But it's my understanding that there are some changes that are coming through legislation to fully implement AB 705 equitable placement in our system. Can you briefly explain what is going through the legislation to make sure that we, sign, seal, deliver AB 705 equitable implementation within our system?
No, absolutely. So I want everyone to Google California Assembly Bill, now AB 1705, right? So playing on that 705 to 1705. This is a potential legislative act coming out of Assemblymember Irwin's office, the author of the original AB 705, to close some loopholes and to further strengthen the law. So when you look at AB 705, the language there was very specific to assessment and placement, and yet the bar, right, the sort of evidentiary point of proof was really around enrollment, right? When you have a law that talks about maximizing the likelihood that students enter and complete a course, well, then by the very nature of that statement, you have to track where students are entering access, but then you also have to track completion, right? So it's not simply assessment and placement. By nature, that also meant looking at enrollment and then looking at completion. But because those words, right, were not specifically within AB 705, it created some loopholes, right? That's always the catch-22 around any legislation. Legislation is brought forward and then there's the interpretation, right, of that legislation. So it created some loopholes around interpretation. And so part of what 1705 seeks to do is to close some of those loopholes to specify enrollment specifically, so there can be no confusion. Now, we, the Chancellor's Office, have already made that clear, right? In the recent guidance that we've put out, we have made clear this is about access, support, and completion. This is about enrollment. This is about course success. But the law just sort of seals the deal, I would say, by really calling out enrollment specifically. And then, frankly, a number of the items that we brought forward in our recent guidance are then included within that legislation, right? So starting to tease out a bit more with more specificity what that standard of proof is, right? And the kind of evidence that colleges have to be able to produce to continue to have those remedial courses. And then some other nuanced pieces that are in there around data and reporting and things of that nature. But overall, this Assembly Bill 1705 is looking to bring clarity where there was lack of clarity in 705 and bring greater specification that was lacking in 705, that this is not just about stop using assessment tests and let students place where they want to. It really is about ensuring that students are enrolling in those transfer level courses and then ultimately focus on support. How do you support students in those transfer level courses? So there's also some language in the in 1705 around concurrent support and making sure that we're doing what we have to do to ensure that students are successful. None of us want to see greater access to transfer level courses and then students take the course and don't pass the course. That's not the point, right? The whole point here is, how do we establish the kinds of courses and the kind of supports that our students need to be successful in the transfer level course? So you'll see some of that language in AB 1705 as well.
Thank you so much for giving us more information on what AB 1705 will do to solidify the implementation of equitable placement and make sure that our students are being supported through their transfer level course journey. So that concludes our conversation for today on Black History Month and equitable placement. Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe, for taking the time to talk with us on these important topics that are very, very crucial for the success for our students. And also thank you for those in the audience for joining us and hearing this important conversation.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Aisha, to you, President Chavez, for highlighting this topic, and to all of our students for the great work that you're doing. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.